What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we have something a lot more special than you'd think. You see, I turn around and you see behind me an E46. Now, it just looks like a regular 3 Series to the untrained eye. It definitely doesn't look like an M3 because it doesn't have the bulging fender flares or the different bumper. It's just a late model E46, but what makes it so special? Well, today we're going to go over what it is exactly that makes this particular 3 Series, the 330 Zhp, so special. When BMW made the Zhp, they went ahead and gave the enthusiast everything that they would want for the ultimate daily driver. This was one step below the M3, and it shows. Now, the power isn't there with the E46 M3, but it still is powerful. This car has 235 horsepower. It actually had 10% more power than the regular 330i. It had a higher red line. It also had better steering rack, lighter control arms, better brakes, and shorter shifter linkage, which all allowed for a better driving experience overall. On top of that, for the actual BMW collector that collects these cars and rare BMW examples, the Zhp is one of the rarest ones that you can find. This particular example is only one out of 140 ever produced. With Zhps crossing over the $15,000 mark, as we've seen recently, clean examples are getting harder and harder to find, and it brings into question, should I buy one of these or should I buy an E36 M3? Now, I know a lot of people are gonna get triggered by that statement, but hear me out. The E36 M3 is a great platform. I'm not gonna deny it. The M badge is an iconic M badge, but there is an upcharge for no reason when you're talking about the E36 M3 versus the E46 Zhp. You see, when the E36 M3 came out, it was a fantastic car in Europe. And in the US, it was still a good car, but it wasn't as great as the European example. The European examples came with a completely different engine, individual throttle bodies, and it was much more aggressive. The car that we got here in the United States, well, it was kind of neutered, and to be honest, it was the same horsepower as this. Same horsepower as this. More dated design, less reliability, harder to find parts. I don't know. Overall, I think that the E46 Zhp is a better investment and is a much more enjoyable car than the E36 M3. You have more modern creature comforts, you have better AC, more safety, and if you really look at them side by side, I think that this car is going to age way better than the E36 M3. For the collector that is collecting to invest in cars, I personally think the Zhp is a great idea because the Zhp is only going up in price and it's only going to get harder to find. These cars literally had almost half of the production numbers of the E36 M3 US variants. These cars are very hard to come across because most of them were daily drivers and succumbed to regular driving accidents, poor ownership, and overall, some might be in rougher conditions than others. And whenever you find one that's actually collector grade, buy it. I would. But when you look at an E36 M3 versus a non-M, there are no differences in body panels really. There's different bumpers and different aero kits and stuff like that, sure, but it's not as aggressive of a difference between the Zhp and the E46 M3. The Zhp and E46 M3 have big differences, but the Zhp, the E36 M3, and the E36 non-M, just a regular 328i or 328is, they're all pretty much the same sort of narrow body car with no differences in bodywork. Yes, this one has a kit. Yes, an IS would have a kit, but the M3 of that generation would also have the same kit as the IS. When you're talking about E30s, the 325is and the 318is were both amazing examples that had the same sort of ethos. They had upgraded steering racks, better shifter linkage, better brakes, better suspension, but no M engine. As for the E36 ISs, those were also rare, but also had better brakes, better suspension, better steering racks, different body kits as well, but those are pretty much identical copies of the M variant of the E36 platform. If I'm looking at an E36 M3 and I realize that it's gonna make the same amount of power as this, and it's gonna handle pretty much the same, and this is more reliable, ages better, doesn't have an interior that melts, and I can find parts for it easier for less because it doesn't carry an M badge on it, I'll just get this. As far as enjoyment is concerned, this conversation really doesn't matter because at the end of the day, if you collect to enjoy and to actually drive your cars like you should, these cars all evoke different emotions, and it's at the end of the day up to you to decide what emotions you feel when driving the cars. Now, I'm sure you might not be fully convinced, but let's take it on a drive and you'll get it. I know what I said in there. I'm aware of what I said, and I'm gonna die on that hill because I genuinely do think that in the long run, a 330i Zhp is gonna hold its value better than a American market E36 M3. Here's why. For all of you people that are already typing away in the comments as how triggered you are, you're gonna need data. And this is the hard pill to swallow here. Data shows us that upon the end of the life cycle of the American E36 M3, all manual and automatic sedan, coupes, and convertibles accounted for totaled out to 26,000 units made and sold. However, when talking about an E46 Zhp, the total was 14,000, and that already accounts all automatics, all sedans, all manuals, all coupes, and all convertibles. The next unfortunate truth is performance numbers. The E36 M3 in the US came neutered in comparison to the European example. European S50 B30 power plants came with 280 horsepower. They had ITBs and they were a completely different monster in comparison to the American ones. American examples came with pretty much just a beefed up M50/M52 from the 325i and 328i's respectively, and they named them the S50 and the S52 in the US. But those cars came with probably the same amount of horsepower as this. It came with 230, 240 horsepower, and when you really compare stock for stock, both this car and the E36 M3 have pretty much identical performance figures. As far as styling is concerned, this car is going to age way better than the E36 M3. Their interiors don't melt half as bad as the E36 M3s do. And finding a clean example of these is harder because of the fact that these were non-M cars. Non-M cars meant that you could daily drive them. Non-M cars meant that whoever it was that was driving the car pretty much determined the fate of it. It was more susceptible to being totaled. It was more susceptible to multiple ownerships. It was more susceptible to owners neglecting them. And it was also susceptible to more corrosion and more deterioration than the E36 M3s. Finding clean examples of either of these platforms isn't easy, but they're out there. Thanks to the production numbers being so low on the ZHPs, this particular example that I am in is one out of only 140 made. To some collectors, the letter M is all that matters. Because this car doesn't really have officially a letter M on it, it won't be as valuable to them. However, to those who are in the niche of getting very rare examples of BMWs, they will pay top dollar for these cars. And these cars have proven to be going up in value almost by the day. It's those extra 10% of horses that make a difference in this car. It's the red line that's higher that makes it just that much more enjoyable. It's the shorter shifter linkage, the more aggressive differential gearing, the lighter control arms, the better steering rack, and the better braking that make the ZHP what it is. It's a phenomenal car. And then of course, there's the power band. Listen to that. It just sings. This car is what the American market E36 M3 is if it was modernized. Simple. So my final verdict, I honestly would pick this car over a US spec E36 M3. As always guys, stay safe, drive safe, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.